This morning we're at Rapid City, beside a very nicely tended cemetery. I think that when we pass away, our remains should be treated with dignity and respect. So depending on our culture, we may end up in a place like this one. Unfortunately, not all cemeteries are so well attended, and I've heard that there's an older cemetery at Rapid City that, well, is frankly abandoned.
I'm Gordon Goldsborough, head researcher for the Manitoba Historical Society, radio and newspaper columnist, and author of books on the neglected, the overlooked, the hidden places from Manitoba's past. Join me in this series as we explore back roads to places that tell great stories about how things used to be and how we've ended up where we are today. This is Abandoned Manitoba. In 1874, the Canadian government gave John Ralston of Ottawa a tract of land near present-day Rapid City. Ralston brought 460 people from Ontario and Michigan, but postponement of railway construction in the region prompted most of the settlers to return home later that year. The Ralston colony was an abject failure, and Ralston's agreement with the federal government was cancelled after just 3 years. In 1877.
So I'm not exactly sure where this cemetery is located. I found 3 sets of coordinates for it, 2 of which I'm not so sure about. The third set looks kind of trustworthy, but we've encountered a fence. And as you can see, there's a sign that says no trespassing, permission required. So I'm not really sure if this is the right place either. Fortunately, one of the members of our production crew knows the landowner, has got a phone number for them, so maybe we'll give them a call and just see if perhaps they know, is this where the cemetery is located? Mr. Moore. Yeah, this is Gordon Goldsborough from the Manitoba Historical Society. I understand that you own some land northeast of Rapid City where there's an old cemetery. Yeah. Yeah, we're hoping we maybe could get into the site. We're not exactly sure where it is. Is there any chance you could come out and meet us and maybe guide us to the spot? Great, wonderful. See you soon. Thanks, bye-bye.
I'm fortunate that landowner Scott Moore, accompanied by his Chesapeake Bay retriever, lives close by and was willing to guide me to the site of the old cemetery. Scott's family has a history in the area going back to the 1940s, and Scott himself grew up here. Although his family owns the land around the cemetery, Scott made clear that the cemetery itself is the property of the municipality of Oakview.
I'm really quite impressed that the trail is as well defined as it is. We've had trouble in some places finding any kind of trail.
But my grandfather was the one who made all these trails, because there's lots of them here, because he cut firewood for people in town. So he'd cut 50 to 70 cords a year. So all these trails were made, by him, so he had access.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So how long does your family go back here? How long have they owned this property?
They bought it in 1945. They bought this farm. Yeah. Okay. And Ralston himself planned on having the colony where the town would be, but the railroad decided Rapid City would be where it is, and then once they started developing Rapid City, then the colony, everyone moved from there.
And that's why there's a cemetery over here, but there's the modern one over by the town.
Right. And I think this one went to like 1890s, and I think they moved it to the Rapid City Cemetery. They dug a lot of the bodies out. You'll see when we get up there, there's holes everywhere.
Oh, really?
So, yeah.
So they have disinterred people
and
moved them?
Yes, they have. Yes,
okay.
Yes.
But do we know if there's still any burials there?
Yep, there's still, I think, 6 to 8.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's go have a look.
Sure, for sure.
I'm really struck by how many oak trees there are here. I mean, that's usually a sign that the site is quite a bit drier, and it's certainly higher. We climbed up quite a bit to get here.
Yeah, it is, and it's rocky under here. I don't know how they dug these graves 150 years ago, but and here's the first one.
Incredible. Boy, I don't know if I would have ever found that. Let's see, Tyndall Eagles, born August 9th, 1856, died July 21st, 1882. So probably one of the earliest members of that Ralston colony.
Yes, and a lot of what that are left here, I think there's 7 or 8 stones left here, is they're either young people like this that would have been traveling across Canada, headed their way west, or it was families that lost children. There's a lot of children were buried here. I know when I was a kid and the stones were quite a bit more, well, there was more than they were in better shape. There was quite a few of them had lambs on them, and that meant usually a child had died.
Right.
There's only one, I think, family that's in here, so.
Well-worn paths lead to a few visible stones and markers, and there are many hollows and mounds of earth, presumably where caskets have been removed, but the resulting holes were not filled back in.
You know, back in the 1970s when I was a kid, these trees weren't here. So yeah, I remember all these holes and everything. So. There's holes in here, but I don't see any stones in here.
You know, it's so important to document the information that is on these stones. You know, my good friend David Ford has been putting together information about these various graves, you know, just so that they're not forgotten. And who knows, there may well be family members of these people far flung around the world who they made us not know that they've got kin here in this little cemetery. So it's bad that it's in such a poor condition, but at least having the documentation means that we can remember these people, because I think that's really what we owe them. This site leaves me with a couple of thoughts. One is that local knowledge is so important when you're trying to find a site that is pretty obscure. I don't think we would have found it if it hadn't been for the help of the landowner here. The other is that it's really sad that a graveyard of people that died over 100 years ago has been left to basically grow over the way it has. And it's especially troublesome because it's owned by the municipality. You know, that means they have a responsibility, I think, to do right for the people that are buried there and either clean it up or move those graves to the other cemetery, the more recent one. You know, again, it seems to me it's just a basic question of respect that we owe anyone who has died and been buried in a cemetery.
The abandoned cemetery near Rapid City is one of many around Manitoba. A cemetery on the south side of Portage la Prairie, next to a busy bypass highway, is largely overlooked today. It is the former site of an Indigenous settlement that once existed here.
In 1862, the Sioux, or Dakota people of the U.S. state of Minnesota, battled with the U.S. Army. And in the aftermath of that, 38 Sioux men were hanged, the largest mass execution in American history. They wanted to avoid further conflict, and so they came to what was then known as British North America, today's Manitoba. Jump forward to 1956. There was concern that the nearby Assiniboine River might flood the community, and therefore it was moved to the west, where it still stands today, leaving behind the cemetery where burials had occurred right from the 1870s right up into the 1950s. Following Indigenous tradition, there weren't any permanent markers at that time, and one of the local landowners, Guthrie Patterson, worried that the knowledge of this cemetery might be lost. So he lobbied the local member of parliament. He engaged with the Manitoba Historical Society to put up a monument to ensure that this cemetery would never be forgotten.
Forgotten burial sites are also common in parts of Manitoba that were settled starting in the 1870s by Mennonites arriving from Europe.
I'm not a mythical baseball player looking for his field of dreams. I'm actually here looking for a family cemetery. But what I see, of course, is an intensely agricultural landscape, and that's the problem. You know, sometimes the progress of agriculture to grow food for a hungry world makes it more difficult to preserve heritage, and especially so when the cemeteries are long gone, when they're in the farm landscape and you can't find them or you can't access them because there's just so much food being grown. In 1876, Mennonite farmer Franz Enns arrived here with his family to establish a farm. Over the years, as family members would pass away, they'd be buried on the farm. So there's a little cemetery associated with the farm. But when the farm was sold outside of the family, the new owner plowed up the road, took out the buildings, and so there's really no sign from the road here of that little cemetery. My GPS tells me that it's somewhere out there, but I just can't see it, so I guess I'm going to have to send up a drone.
Were it not for my drone, it would be impossible to see the Enns family cemetery from the nearby road because there was a crop in the field when I visited. Drones are an excellent way to avoid trespassing on sensitive and private historic sites, and inaccessible ones, such as this small cemetery. Cemeteries can provide a wealth of useful historical and demographic information about a community. So I always find it sad when a cemetery has been severely neglected. It seems to me that all cemeteries in Manitoba deserve to be maintained and accessible year-round, so the sacrifices of those who came before us to give us the comfortable life that we enjoy today can be appreciated fully.
Our experiences today leave me with three thoughts. First is I think we need to have a better inventory of the cemeteries around the province. Yes, ones like this are easy to find, but there's a whole lot more that are not so easy to find, and some of them are pretty inconspicuous. So a better idea of how many are out there is, I think, essential. Second thing is we need to do a better job protecting them. Some come under the provisions of the Cemeteries Act in the provincial legislation. Clearly, this one does, but many do not. The ones on private land do not, and they should be. And the third, maintenance. They change so fast. A cemetery that was nicely tended last year is overgrown this year. And what you need, therefore, is somebody willing to tend them in perpetuity. Well, that's not easy, especially when it's a family that's looking after it. So maybe we need to look at things like endowment funds that could produce the means to pay somebody forever to look after these cemeteries. Because fundamentally, we need to do a better job at preserving them and showing respect to the people who came before us.